settled enough? I'm sorry to crack the whip, but we can get us started?
Yeah, so we started a little bit of this presentation during the regular meeting. Again, we do acknowledge that we're a little bit out of sequence, but we've got some timeliness issues that we'll talk a little bit about, just to kind of explain what sort of some of the urgency is around bringing the recommendations forward and hopefully getting some closure or board action on them within by the end of the month. I just want to introduce the folks who are here you may not know. So this is Mitch Evans. Some folks may remember from boundary adjustment days and process. Mitch, community member, longtime member of the Enrollment Demographics Task Force. And Denise Stiffmeyer back there, she's legal counsel who works with us on around our capital facilities plan. And then of course Sebastian's is, and he's, you're on the EDF right here? Yeah.
Well, then, come up here.
So,
Please.
you're the sole survivor, so.
Big enough.
You do realize
You
if
were
you sit at the
supposed to be
table, you got to talk.
So as hopefully board members are aware from, you receive the EDTF minutes regularly in your board briefing. The EDTF has been studying and looking at long-term enrollment trends and options for how to develop the multi-site and in what timeline and what other facility needs of the district are moving forward. They've processed through a number of different scenarios, a number of different recommendations. I think it's important to know that as big as the transitions and changes are we have coming in the fall of 2017, as we've pointed out time and time again, they are merely a milestone. They're not an ending point. There's never an ending point of continuing to adapt and adjust our facility needs as our population changes, as our facilities change, as policy changes, things like full-day kindergarten, K-3 class size reduction. So it's always somewhat of a moving target. We've just had the benefit in the last 20 years of having probably the greatest period of stability that we've had in the district, and that's starting to change and evolve a little bit. We're starting to look a little bit more fluid like we did back in the majority of the history of the district. So with that, I will kind of turn it over to Doug and Ryan and company and kind of walk you through where they're at and what the EDTF is recommending.
So thank you, Larry. So our goal tonight is to take sort of this 9 months we've been working on with the task force and summarize it in 24 pages. Okay? So that's our goal. So we'll let Doug start, and then Mitch and I, and Karen will kind of help chime in.
So, good evening. We're going to hit where we've been really quickly, where we are now, and some of the next steps to just give you some context there. Briefly going to go through some of the milestones just to give us some context. 2006, we had a $123 million bond, and we used that primarily for Bothell Phase 3 to Woodville Phase 1. And the EDTF recommended, and we got approved some boundary changes that were implemented in 2007 that we hoped would last through about 2012. 2008, the EDTF had recommended, and then subsequently the board rejected an elementary school consolidation. That was the task that we did back that time. 2 years later, the voters approved a $149 million bond that was primarily used for Woodville Phase 2 and Kenworth Junior Phase 3. And the economic recession that we were seeing in by that time frame was helping to add some life to the boundary changes that we had implemented in 2007. We kind of extended that a little bit. Purchased the Anderson property on the multi-site, 2010. And at that time, we were talking about grade reconfiguration potentially, and had talked about putting 4 grades at the existing 3 high schools, and had done an analysis of what that might cost, what that might look like operationally, and it was rejected basically because we couldn't swallow that large school at the time, basically. The following year, the board said, hey, go examine other alternatives for enrollment demographics, or for the enrollment growth and reconfiguration. And we purchased another piece of property adjacent to the Fernwood Elementary. And in 2012, we purchased another piece of property next to the Fernwood Elementary. And the board approved the recommendation to implement the grade reconfiguration for 912 and a new high school in the 2014 bond. And 2 years later, the voters approved that $177 million bond for North Creek and Woodville Phase 3 primarily. And the board approved the timeline for the 2017 implementation. And last June, the board approved preliminary work to be happening starting at the multi-site, so we kind of get a leg up on the site. And the EDTF, as you recall, recommended the feeder pattern changes and the new stuff for the grade reconfiguration new high school in 2017, and then 4 months ago, you guys approved that boundary feeder pattern change. That's how we got to where we are.
So lots of work. The goal
Lots of
is
work.
lots of work in the last 10 years by ETF and the board as we sort of get to this place. And as Larry said, we view this as sort of milestone decisions. It's not an ending decision that will sunset.
So during the past few years, the EDTF has prioritized how to mitigate capacity issues, and this is a kind of a priority about how we deal with capacity issues from least difficult to most difficult, or least complex to most complex and impactful. So the first section up here that we have done and have been doing are shorter lead time and less expensive kind of mitigations with less impact to folks, and then the longer lead time, more complex, more expensive options are down here, and we're going up and down this list the whole way.
Yeah, so as you can see, we've pretty much checked the box.
If I could say though, one thing that I don't think I see on the list is going to 2 shifts.
2 shifts, summer school, those
Night
things,
schools.
we haven't done those as mitigation.
Right, and those have huge operational and transportation, other issues, but just always to keep on our mind, there are other ways to deal
Right.
with.
These are the ones that we
Utilization capacity.
are using and have considered. There are definitely other ways.
Right.
Those have been discussed.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Okay, and then essentially, huge operational
Yes.
logistical challenges.
There's community involvement now.
So where are we now? For the last, like I said, Brian said, the last 7 or 9 months, the EDTF has been focusing on where we are now and what the next steps are coming on, even because for the EDTF, that 2017 implementation, the Big Bang year, is past. They're looking out for the next cycle. So the EDTF, one of the benefits of having an ongoing committee with rotating positions is that you don't have to start over every year. You have this tribal knowledge that passes on, and so the issues and concerns that the EDTF was aware of and trying to deal with in the last few years are still around, and they're knowledgeable. So this is a list of EDTF concerns that they have now, and and they're not in any specific order. Short term, through 2025 is considered short term, that's 2 bond cycles. Elementary capacity, Fernwood, Frank Love, Chris Springs, Canyon Creek, Kokanee, those elementaries up in that north central area. Longer term elementary capacity, this is just our list of priorities or issues. Short term middle school capacity, issues at Skyview and Canyon Park. Short term elementary capacity, either shortages or underutilization everywhere. Impacts on students transitioning due to those transitions anytime that you change boundaries when you add capacity. That was a big concern. Number of temporary facilities, portables that we have district-wide, obviously is still a concern. There's about 125 portables in inventory right now. And the age of those portables, I think we said in 2020, there's about 84, 85 portables that would be over 25 years old. Another huge issue was making sure that we have a wise investment of our scarce resources. And finally, it was important that they wanted some flexibility and adaptability because the forecasts change, our environment changes, whether it's legislative mandates or the UGA moves or jurisdiction things happen that we can't control. So we want to build some flexibility and adaptability in. So recognizing that we probably can't address every single one of these issues, they're all issues, but we have to probably prioritize because we have limited time or resource. The EDTF chose to prioritize these 3 as their top priorities to try and address immediately, and the other ones don't go away, they're just less urgent than these 3. the short-term, elementary, middle school, and to provide some flexibility and adaptability as we move forward. So, based on, like, we were saying earlier about the enrollment, the roll-up of the existing kids, birth cohorts, housing starts, kind of identifies what our enrollment projections are, and then you add that in with the instructional and program needs that we can anticipate, and that creates some scenarios or some options that we can try and then accommodate. So the ETF came up with a whole bunch of scenarios. So I'm going to walk through these quickly so we can kind of see the and this is in, there's about 9 on here, and they're in sequence, but I'm going to give them to you in a different way because they're easier to understand. One of the options we always look at is don't do anything. Scenario 2 was to look at a new K-5, about 600 kids on the Maltby site to be opened in 2020. But that would address elementary capacity or elementary needs in that north end, but nothing else. Scenario 3 was again a standalone, build a 6-8 middle school on the Maltby site in 2020. That would address middle school capacity issues, but not the elementary issues. So then we started looking at hybrids. So scenario 4 was a combination of a K-5 and a 6-8 on the Maltby site in a combined campus, sharing facilities and have separate wings for the 2 different levels, but sharing some common spaces like library, gym, playfields, cafeterias and such, and scheduling around that, but making sure that the instructional needs for that kind of combination, because we haven't done that combination on one site, are coordinated appropriately. So that was one flavor of that. We did 2 other flavors of that same thing with about 1,000 kids, and we said, well, we want to make the most of that site. Nothing's ever going to be cheaper or easier. So at that Maltby site, maybe we could put 500 and 700, or maybe 600 and 800. And Karen's smiling because the max on that site was probably, no matter how you structure it, is probably going to be 1,200. So those were scenarios.
Yeah, what's significant about these scenarios is part of the information that was provided to the task force was some what-if scenarios from a site perspective, but also what if from a jurisdictional impact and a cost impact. So the goal of the task force was really trying to get as much information as possible around the impacts, cost impacts, and then instructional impacts or jurisdictional impacts as we continue to move forward. And what's significant about this is that if you're going in for a permit with the various jurisdictions, they have various requirements on what the impacts would be for an elementary versus a middle school. Even though they seem like same kids, they have different impacts. Okay?
When you say impact, Frank, you're talking specifically about what they'll require us
What they're
to
required to
do
do.
to offset the development.
Yeah,
as
and
far
you'll
as
see
new
some
road
of that as we
construction.
talk about traffic mitigation, septic mitigation, or whatever mitigation that the jurisdictions is going to impose on the district.
And then those become increased costs to just the raw construction.
Yes.
Our construction costs of a new facility become the related costs associated with mitigating those impacts.
Yeah, so let me give you an example of that.
Just not
North
the
Creek High
separate
School.
one.
So part of North Creek High School, I think one of the things the board's aware is we had to build sidewalks or road structures. That was a mitigated impact that was required by Snohomish County of the district to build the school. So one of the things we had to do was try to hammer out with the jurisdictions what exactly you wanted us to build as far as sidewalks or streets. So if you look at the street grid around the new high school, 188th, 196, I believe.
192nd.
192nd, we built all those roads on that side. On 35th, we built half the roads on that side. But we built all the sidewalks that's contiguous to our property. So those are some of the impacts that the jurisdictions will impose for us, for the district to secure a building permit.
Sorry to interrupt. What is the mitigation difference between an elementary school and a middle school?
Well, primarily around traffic.
Number of traffic trips.
Although
they
there
count.
are some code differences, building code differences around a secondary school versus an elementary school specific to Snohomish County. So not every jurisdiction does it that way.
Do they think there's a different number?
There's a whole complicated, confusing science around traffic mitigation and concurrency and trip rates based on an international established formula for time of day, peak trips, intersections in the area, roadways in the area, what the loads are. So we
The answer is
obviously
yes.
have outside consultants that run all of that, but it's, that's why it's not a simple thing.
Right, yeah, no,
Yeah.
okay.
We wish the formula was that simple.
Okay.
The other difference between the Maltby site and the North Creek site is there's obviously, it's a much more rural area, there's much less existing infrastructure and development around that property.
So remember, part of our school at North Creek, at least the building side of it, is built in the UGA, and the field side is built outside of the UGA line. So remember, the line runs right down
Yep.
parallel. This piece of property all sits outside of the UGA.
How far is it from like Maltby Cafe?
No, it's on Maltby Road.
Oh, Maltby
Yeah.
Road.
Yeah, it's just about, probably not even a half a mile from
Yeah, very close.
the intersection of 39th and Maltby Road.
Yeah.
Okay, to the right.
Half a mile
Yes.
east.
East.
East, okay.
Okay, so these scenarios evolved, then another couple of hybrid scenarios evolved. One, scenario 5, where we considered a 6-8 large middle school at the Maltby site, and in conjunction with that, repurposed the Skyview Canyon Creek site, that is the Skyview part of that, as an elementary primary center for programs or whatever to provide some flexibility at that site, which is more centrally located adjacent to other schools, and we're trying to provide capacity for some other programs up in that area. The flip side of that was scenario 6 is, okay, let's build a really large elementary school instead at the Maltby site and use the Canyon Creek portion of that campus at Skyview as a middle school addition to add more capacity for middle school in the area. So those were other scenarios. And then scenario 9 was a hybrid, which is a K-5, normal K-5 size school, 500 students, 6-8 middle school on that combined campus, separate wings, and a 24+ minimum classroom wing at that Skyview Canyon Creek campus to provide flexible capacity at that more central location. So these were the scenarios that we went through and did work on each of them.
In detail.
In detail.
Yeah.
The other thing at this, again, like here, that this scenario 9 addresses that need for some more additional flexible capacity in that central area there, where we want more EAP, AAP programs, special ed programs up there, so kids aren't traveling so far to get to the other sites. A little more, less distance for some kids to have equal access to some of those programs.
So this recommendation 9 or scenario 9 that we're sharing with you right now, this was our first blush at trying to sort through how do we meet the elementary need in that north end that the EDTF identified, as well as trying to meet the middle school need at Skyview and Canyon Park at those two sites. In addition, how do we meet the flexible need that I think was identified by EDTF, knowing that Skyview and Canyon Park is in the center of your growth area. So we thought this would be, from the task force, this recommendation of a wing or a 24 classroom addition would be the optimal way to provide that flexibility in the center of the district.
So the idea, Ryan, would be that depending on where the enrollment is trending, whether it's heavier at elementary or heavier at middle school, the utilization of the classrooms in that flexible building would shift back and forth
Shift
from
back and
elementary
forth.
to secondary.
Yeah, and that was the same concept at Mulkey.
Right.
Is trying to figure out how to flex that.
That's the
Space.
concept of both sides.
Yes.
Yeah, so, as you saw in your packet, the recommendation is that option, or scenario 9 that you saw, providing that flexible capacity to accommodate the growth in program access by doing a multi-combination as well as a classroom wing at the Skyview Canyon Creek site. And continue to look for and acquire property in that north central area if there's any parcels more than half an acre left. And continue to analyze the data that we are getting about potentially consolidating or reusing a piece of a facility on the east side. But as these things become known, the legislative impacts, and the urban growth and those kind of things that we have no control over, that's part of that flexibility. As we learn more about those things, we have to stay up on those things, obviously.
And the board has a standing adopted resolution that encompasses that last bullet.
Yeah.
Ryan, how many people can fit in the classroom with the 24 flexible?
Yeah, so
No,
typically,
you did that at Skyview.
How many in the room or how many in the building,
Building.
in the addition?
Well, you give numbers for the other
About
two, like 700, 500,
Yeah,
and
about 500.
about 500 in that.
So that's a smallish, medium-sized elementary school.
Or the school on the bottom at the Skyview level and elementary at the top.
Robbie's just trying to get a sense, so it's
Yeah.
half a middle school or one of our
one of
medium-sized.
our elementary schools.
So we're
elementary
talking,
schools,
we
right.
could potentially house another 1,700 students with that.
1,700 students.
Though
With
if
the
you
combo.
use it for like, the special ed, it might be less students in there.
Correct. Depends how you use the space.
And that's part of the visioning that we still have to go through once the decision is made.
Okay.
And just for scale, the multi-site, I think you're 33 acres, but there's 11 acres of wetlands. So we're talking about putting 1,200 kids in a site that's about 22 acres functional space. Canyon Creek and Skyview sit on 61 acres. That's why we're looking, and they're all usable, maybe 5 to 10 acres, a steep slope area. So that's kind of an area.
More than 24 classes there then?
Well, that's why we listed 24 plus for now.
Oh, 24 plus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other significance, as Mitch talked about, is infrastructure in Canyon Creek and Skyview is somewhat built with your roads and sidewalks and everything else, where in Mulkey, you're starting from ground zero.
So then when you say looking for other property, but we have the Wellington property, so I think we should look for other property. But
But not yet.
Yeah, so just as a reminder, we're still in litigation around Wellington, so we have
We don't
a,
technically own
we have
it.
a contract
Yes.
to purchase Wellington, subject to discharging of the litigation.
Yes.
What I'm interpreting the EDCF is saying that even should we
at the time. I
get Wellington, we should continue to keep scouting around for property in the north end of the city.
So I'm happy we're looking for property right now.
Scouting's a good
Very happy.
way.
So if I can weigh in on that last point that Larry made, I'm in the development industry. We build a lot of these plats for subdivisions, commercial properties, large-scale projects. There isn't much properties in your district of size more than, say, 10 acres. There just aren't, or they're all swamps, or they're all cliffs, or they're all something else. There's
It's the
just-
Homish County.
Yeah, well, even in King
King
County,
County.
there's really not that much of these large holdings. If you tell me you need 25 acres for an elementary school, I mean, this is what I do for a living. I can name 3 in your district, other than the ones you're already under contract or looking at. That's all there is.
But now there's some houses, like, in some, like, you know what they did on 39th, right?
I do.
Oh, that's all right. And so there's some houses in other areas that I still think are within an urban, I go, okay, that's all gonna start toppling down pretty soon.
Yep.
And then
You
I
can
put
assemble,
this
you can
patchwork
You can do what we
together.
call an assemblage
Yeah.
to put together parcels where you're buying this and that and the other. The first 3 might fall at a reasonable dollar rate. Even those are beyond your ability to purchase. because you have to pay market, and the developers are paying 2 times market right now. But the first 3 parcels of those 4 or 5 parcel assemblages you can buy, but the 4th and the 5th one are 5 times market, because you need them. So it's really a hard game for people. Yeah, exactly, it's the rat trap. Oh.
So
Which is what we sort of experienced when we were trying to do an assemblage around the
Yeah.
Mulkey site.
Yes.
So then your alternative is condemnation, which
Yes. Which is why we believe, as we've been working with the EDTF, the Wellington site was so attractive to EDTF as well as the district, is that we're dealing with one owner who's actually interested in selling at a reasonable price.
So with regards specifically to Mulkey, and I know I've asked this before, brain Swiss cheese these days. Why do we not go more up?
Yeah, I wanted to ask that too.
Floors, multiple floors.
We're
Or 3
projecting
floors, or-
the tallest that the code will allow, which would be 2.5
You'll
stories.
see.
You'll see, yeah.
But there's a
You'll see.
code restriction on
Yeah,
how
There's
height
no
floors.
restriction.
Is that true though for Skyview and Canyon Creek?
Depending on when they were built.
Yeah, and a
So
different
there's,
territory.
there's certain jurisdictions at the time you're building that is going to be overlaid upon that.
But the Skyview one is also 2 stories right now.
Right, but then Canyon Creek could possibly be 2 stories. How many acres are left that you can build on there?
Well, you can continue to build as far out as the county will allow us. We don't know at this point in time, so that's part of the, I think, exercise we're going through with the jurisdictions.
Thanks, Doc.
So, next steps. Really the near-term activities, and I really mean near-term activities, is the first reading today, the board study session right now, and in 2 weeks, the second reading apparently is scheduled in 2 weeks. The recommendation approval is integrated, you know, it enables that integration and coordination with a lot of other activities that are kind of trip points for the approval, and we've talked a little bit about some of those. EDTF obviously would continue to coordinate, examine scenarios and site utilization or phasing or whatever. And the GCCM process is imminent, as well as what you heard a little bit earlier, and we'll speak to it now, is the capital facilities plan update would potentially identify the projects which would be required for the impact fee eligibility.
So let's put this on hold, and we'll come back to the end of the presentation to kind of get a little bit more in detail.
Okay? So strictly for context, again, this is a conceptual timeline. If everything would go just happy and the weather was perfect and everything, for the next 4 years, these are the kinds of steps that are ahead of us, just again, to give us context. May of this year, approved the recommendations, GCCM application in May. May, June, the capital facilities plan update has to be filed with the jurisdictions. The conditional use permit would be filed for in January of 2017. Again, in 2017, in the spring, the EDTF would give our annual recommendations updates to the board. In the fall of, or late summer of 2017, the capital bond planning task force would be making a recommendation to the board. And normally, when you have a bond in the February timeframe, in the October before, the board would be approving that 2018 bond levy scope, as well as then the board resolutions for the bond levy to make the filing deadline, which is in December, for that February election. And then bond levy election in February 2018. If the bond is approved and we preloaded and done our homework, then in March we could actually begin on-site construction. Again, in the spring we provide annual recommendations to the board, the EDTF. That fall, the EDTF would be providing boundary recommendations, preliminary recommendations for the 2020 opening of a new facilities. And then during that summer, we probably have open houses and speak to people like we've just gone through. And then, again, in spring of 2019, we would make recommendations to the board about what the final boundaries and/or feeder patterns would be. And a board approval, if you want to implement those boundaries for September 2, 2020, we have to have approval. This is only 15 months ahead of that, so get board approval on those boundary changes. And then the following spring of 2020, and I'm not really being facetious, but these things will come up so fast, it'll make your head spin. In the spring of 2020, the EDTF will be right where we are here today, making recommendations about the 2024 capacity issues and what might be involved in the 2022 bond.
This is the song that
And then, in the spring, in the September of 2020, hopefully that, a facility at the multi-site or whatever would be opening, given perfect weather. So again, for a context sake, that's the cycle. This is a graphic of, to try and attempt to show that cycle, because, you know, it goes through that cycle, and we're, like I said, EDTF is 6 to 8 years ahead, and you have to be that far ahead.
So boundary work, just for clarification, would be much reduced in scope from the current boundary work we're doing. We'll really be looking at probably rejiggering the 5 elementaries, if it was an elementary, so the 5 elementary schools in the north end of the
Middle
district,
school probably.
and maybe some middle school impact, but not touching
Not a
necessarily
great
all the regions in the
reconfiguration,
district.
Yeah, it's gonna be a little smaller.
More normal boundary.
About the 4 big elementary schools at the north end, supersized, we called it, so that when we knew this next step was happening, they were big enough that we have to move kids around one more time, but it would only affect them, it wouldn't affect 28 schools again.
Right.
Because that was exhausting.
I apologize, but can you go back? Yeah, too slow. So just, I guess for our board planning for next year, because that's coming up, and board goals, one of the really effective things that was done the last time around we did this is in that spring, late winter, early spring of 2017, what was it, 1,000 presentations? How many did you do?
Oh,
80 something.
close, over 100 when you talk all the media events and everything.
Right,
So-
every school, every PTA, every staff, Larry did a presentation, not about
Highway
promoting,
restaurants.
yeah, wherever there was a person with a microphone. Not about the bond, but just giving the understanding of why we need to do this and why, because that we're gonna start hearing as we file for this conditional use permit and start spending money, it's gonna be really helpful for the community to have that background and understanding of, wait, I thought you just opened a school, you mean you're not done? And so that really took a lot of our time in February, March of 2013. We were constantly at schools.
The big period was sort of December, January through April.
Okay, well,
And then-
because that was longer than that.
Yeah, well, but it went longer than that, but that was the
It's the push.
real push right
But
there.
it was so effective to getting all of the community to understand, because as Amy can do attest, if you're not driving past that growth, you have no idea what, right?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that's
Those
true.
meadows in Woodinville don't quite get it.
People in downtown Buffalo don't get it.
Right, exactly, so it's,
I
I
mean,
think it's.
that's their own little when I talk
Yeah,
to
you
people
never
there, they
go
have
through it.
no idea what's going on
Right,
over here.
so I think
Unless
as
they're
we
informed.
think about our upcoming school year, that we think in our minds about making sure we're really doing a good communication push so that everyone understands that even though we haven't even opened the new school yet, that's not solving the problem. And kind of get some visuals from people.
I think the thing is though, is that during that time, it was, what I remember hearing is it was said this was going to solve a lot of the problems. So there's probably some of that.
I don't think we said that. I think we
People
very
wanted to
much,
believe that.
Yeah.
we very much said this is only part of it. When we went to 100 of
I
it.
didn't-
I think it's really important, you gotta tell it kind of goes back to the milestone conversation. You have to tell it as kind of it's a river, I mean, it's constantly flowing, and so you really have to, tell that connect that thread of kind of here's the longer term story and where it's happening. I mean, I think there would certainly be some who would say that they maybe had the understanding that opening North Creek and doing all this stuff was gonna solve all our problems now and forever. I don't think anybody could ever go back to a presentation where that was ever said, but what they walk away with may be something different. But I think definitely, you know, here's step one, here's where we're heading now, and then here's what the future looks like. I think telling that story is really important. Second.
That's okay. So for us, the next steps will really be more around providing some examples of the multi-site. And one of the things that I think the EDTF task force asked for is sort of some options. What would the one-phase construction look like? What would be a two-phase construction look like? As well as what are some of the options we can conceptualize in our head of where this building at Skyview Canyon Creek would look like. So that's what we'll go through next.
And the ETF had some, discussions about how could this happen, is it possible, feasible, et cetera.
So just for clarification, single phase would be building both the elementary and middle school facilities on the multi-site at the same time as part of the 2018 bond. Dual phase would be splitting that up over 2 bond cycles, 2018 and 2022.
So again, these are just conceptual ideas to help people at the EDTF understand. So here's a conceptual footprint of the multi-site with this school here, facility being the combined building. We'll see another example in a minute. But like Brian said, you have this huge wetland section over here. So again, for preliminary estimates and stuff, looked at some of the traffic mitigation possibilities. And there's a lot of potential, again, this is all very conceptual because nothing's firm yet. There's a lot of potential traffic mitigation that we're being asked about or being talked about because, like Ryan said, it's a raw site. We're first, we don't have a lot of infrastructure at this site around it. We'd be the first one developing, so ding, 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 you're the winner. And the bottom line is it will probably be expensive, between $10 and $15 million for traffic mitigation, roughly. That's, lots of different things going on.
Some of the unique challenges about this site, as Doug talked about, is that North Creek was one of the middle last developments going in that north end area. So a lot of the infrastructure was already built. This site, we will be first. Not only will we be first, we will have Snohomish County to work with, as well as Washington DOT with the multi-site.
State highway.
State route.
Yep, as well as a few other utility companies. And we have to figure out how to bring water from one end of the sort of one location all the way into the site. So those are challenges that I think Karen, because we need water to typically, yes, the infrastructure of water doesn't
All the
exist.
utilities need to be
Yeah.
extended onto the site, but water is more.
Utilities,
Yeah.
whatever utilities that we typically,
infrastructure.
yeah. I think the challenge that we have is, since we're first, I think we're going through the pain of what is being imposed of us. As you can see, the cost that I think is just being identified purely from a traffic perspective. So the scenarios you have in color are some of the scenario options we've been discussing with Snohomish County. And we've kind of tried to put some price tag around that for ETF to get a better understanding of what's happening.
So that it's 7 million is for sure.
Yeah, the blue stuff we will need to do regardless of what we cite there. Some of the other, I don't know, is that red, red, purple, and green, are all more dependent on 2 things. One, what are we ultimately deciding to build there, because that affects what traffic mitigation we might have to do, and then 2, what will the county decide they want us to do. So there's kind of a range of potentials there. As we are able to have a more definitive approval of what to cite there, and then can move through the design phases, that becomes more concrete. and known, but right now this is the range.
Best estimate.
Yeah, so counties, cities treat school districts as developers.
Any other developer.
Or equal to any development company out there that's developing, and the same rules apply to K-12 as it does to the private sector.
The next page is just a tabular of that same data. Here's another view of that conceptual multi-site with a little better distinction between potentially what a phase 1 and phase 2 would be if you chose to do elementary in phase 1 with parking, play field in this part of the building and the access and egress. So if you did in a phased area way, the elementary blue section here would be done first, and then in a second phase, the junior high, or excuse me, middle school parts would be developed. Again, this is the wetlands over here. So that's just sort of a way to.
Do we own that 1.5 acres?
Yes.
Yes.
Other side
Never
of it.
realized that.
It's
Little
It's
chunk on
trash.
the other side.
It will
So
help
how do
us
we
with
own that?
the, it will help us with the roundabout that we know we have to put in.
There you go.
So, and we also talked about the potential Skyview, Canyon Creek thing,
I have
and
a
again,
question about that, Evan. Is that space flexible then? Can you create it, if you build it all at once, can you create it to be flexible spacing between the two? Like,
yes.
as we grow and,
We could do that either way. We could do it if we build it in one phase or if we build it in two phases. We could make it
That
flexible.
would be,
If we built it in, I'm sorry, if
We
we,
talked about that too.
if we built it in 2 phases, we would probably still design it all at once.
Yes, we'd have to.
So, yeah, so we knew exactly what we were going to do in phase 2 that would integrate with phase 1.
That helps us also with, because we would be submitting our conditional use permit based on the whole property. We would be building out the roadway infrastructure based on the whole project, which means, but then we wouldn't have to go back through that whole process and another set of evaluation and another set of rules or code applied to us when we got ready to do the second phase.
But we talked about being able to either maybe have 600 at the elementary and 500 or 600 at the middle, or vice versa, make the middle a little. So we wanted to be able to have the flex rooms capacity.
so, again, just for conceptual and visualization possibilities, at the Skyview Canyon Creek site, like Mitch Smith said, we have a 60-acre site essentially, and the white is the existing facility, and here's a potential placement for that additional wing with access and egress changes. That's one possibility. The other one was moving it around the other way, just to get ETF to understand the possibilities at that site, because it's flat, it's large, it's got infrastructure already. So those were a couple of things. Again, we talked a little bit about the phase.
Doug, can you go back? What
Sure.
is the rectangle in the upper left-hand corner?
That's the slate field.
Okay.
The dirt, Kenny Creek's dirt.
So what's significant about this property that is kind of neat is that the tiering of the property has your elementary at a higher elevation than your junior high currently. So as we talked about, one option could be run one floor off the elementary wing. That would be the same level
Level.
as
Canyon
the elementary Canyon Creek.
Canyon Creek.
And then your bottom floor
Yes.
could then be for your middle school level, which would be on the same floor.
Level one.
Yeah, so
Very
it all
much.
depends on what the instructional use will be and how we use that, but there's some flexibility in how we can design this.
So, again, conceptual rough ideas for numbers. If you, like we said, if you go in a single phase, the multi-site would cost 135, 140 million. And the Skyview Canyon Creek thing that we just looked at would be 38, 40 million. So you're looking at $180 million for that if you do in a single phase, $180 million for those two pieces. If you chose to split and do something in 2 phases, if you built the first half or the first portion of that multi-site, 85 million, and then this at the same time in that 2018 bond, you're talking about $125 million out of the 2018 bond, and at about $55 million more if you decide to do that second phase, which is that middle school at the multi-site. So two different ways, a couple of different ways with rough numbers.
So one of the things the capital bond planning task force is gonna have to wrestle with is one, as Karen's mentioned several times, in the process of assessing all of our facilities and all of our capital needs. So they don't really have a number that they're targeting to yet. Sort of internally, the number we've been talking about is based on kind of our bond history. Our next bond, if we increased it in an increment, similar to our last bonds, would be somewhere around $200 million.
I
And
live just
if you, and there's a lot of wisdom in
Yeah.
that. There's a lot of wisdom in that.
Don't hit that too,
But if you look at, if you do single phase, all those projects at once, you're talking about the potential for 180 of those $200 million going to just those projects.
Right.
And how that's going to balance out with the needs across the district remains to be seen, both just from a straight on from a facility needs standpoint, as well as from the politics of communities wanting to know that, you know, the bonds are delivering something in their part of the district as well. And, you know, we've had Woodinville, we've had Bothell, we've had pretty good distribution in recent years, but, you know, this, if we did single phase, this would be 2 bond cycles in a row that the lion's share of the bond dollars would really be in the north end of the district. And that, you know, that might be more challenging to sell. So that's what the capital bond planning task force is gonna have to wrestle with a little bit. We've done some work with our, with Piper Jaffray. We've looked at, you know, a $200 million bond in 2018, maybe a $40 million tech levy, $10 million a year, $9 or $10 million a year, and then what we think our M&O levies are going to be. And then we've projected out for 2022 and 2026 bonds as well, sort of sequential growth increments in those. And we think it all fits in a way that would maintain, with very conservative projections, a level tax rate across those measures. I mean, we're assuming like 3% assessed value growth per year, which is pretty conservative. So we think financially a 200 million-ish bond and a 240 million-ish bond in probably 2022 are doable from the projections, initial projections we've done as far as.
It doesn't overtax the.
Right.
Right.
But I have a question, like, do you guys also plan for the other side of that? Meaning that, okay, what happens if we go into another downturn? I mean, do you guys, like, because obviously now the market's been up, what, for 8 years? Will it really go up and that, I mean,
Sure.
we're most likely to have a downturn, maybe not like the one that we had, but truly, we're gonna have this dip.
I think if you look at what the EDTF has projected out to is about 2025. That's what they were most comfortable with, given the data that we've been looking at. So birth trends, housing trends, roll-up of kids in the system currently. So I think as you looked at it, the 3 things they were trying to address is more the short-term need up to 225. And that was the big concern, is we think that's about as far we're willing to go with from a recommendation perspective of what should be developed or built in the 2018 bond. And that's why they said what they wanted to do is create some flexibility, not knowing exactly what would happen beyond 2020 to 2025. But still provide the flexibility of capacity for continued growth in that area. So I
Which is a
think,
good idea.
yeah, I think the EDTF really looked at and wrestled those questions that you're asking around that.
That's one of the reasons EDTech also is a standing task force, is because it's always dynamic. And so they're working with the demographer every year, they're getting updated projections and forecasts, and they're being revised on an annual basis. So I think it's, you know, we're given the best information we have now, but you're right, another downturn, as happened in 2008, and construction went to 0 in a matter of months. You know, that changes everything, or at least it extends the timeline.
Right.
But we have, but
It
to that
happens all
point,
the time.
right, but there's certain capacity levers like portables. So to the extent that we have a lot of old portables, if we went through, you know, like what's kind of what would be the levers you pull if we went through a downturn or
Yep.
flattened out? Would it simply be removing portables, and then even though you have less enrollment, you're not necessarily not having full schools? And it's, you know, it's kind of on the, so those are the kinds of things I'm sure that being able to have those kinds of levers.
And, you know, one of the things I
Because we're
look
on
at,
max on the portable, I would think, and we haven't really talked about that and the financial consequences of that. But is that kind of the thing where we would policy-wise move to having less or no portables? Does that even make sense? Because that's certainly with 100 portables, that's a lot of flexible if you thought about that, but.
it's one of the things that I started from the first time you guys talked to me was, well, why do we have 20% of our kids in portables? That's not long-term thinking. So even with the downturn, which was huge, I mean, my company went from 35 people to 8, you know, in 2 weeks. Even with the downturn, we're still, you know, this isn't the EDTF talk, this is me, you're probably 5 to 6 schools short of where you need to be to not have hundreds of portables in your district.
And the K through 3, you know, yeah.
Exactly, without all
Yeah,
those other things.
And that's actually a really good way to put
Yeah.
it. So, yeah, you're saying we could have a downturn, we still have the issue.
Right, but
Yeah.
that's a great scenario plan for
Yeah.
the community, is if we put everyone in a brick and mortar,
Right.
we're 5 schools short.
Yeah.
Okay?
That's just my opinion.
No,
That's not-
but
Right.
I think it's a policy
Yeah.
choice that allows you to think through, but it also mitigates the risk of a downturn.
Right, that's what I
Because
think.
what we call natural
Yeah.
attrition, right?
And it's a
Yeah.
discussion that was
Sorry.
rediscussed at the EDTF level. I mean, it was really, and that's why portables was listed on there, and one of the exercises we had to provide for EDTF is how many portables would reach the life in 2020? I mean, that was one of the questions that was at 2025, I believe.
And we still have warning symbols out there that we're looking back at and going, you know, one of the newest schools in your district is so far east with lots of empty classrooms. We don't want to do that and then go for another bond, you know, to have that kind of vacancy and say, hey, we need more schools. That's obviously not good politics, not good salesmanship.
Are we still looking at repurposing one of those schools out there, like for, I mean,
Not
is that
actively.
in part of this discussion or
No.
not?
Just to the extent that we want to keep it on the agenda, but no, we haven't had active conversation about repurposing the school out there. Enrollment has sort of stabilized on the east side of the district, and we've been able to push program out there. You know, adding a third each side at Sunrise is a good example of full-day kindergarten will help utilize some of the existing classroom space. So
K3 class size.
K3 class size reduction. So there are things that are helping to utilize some of the excess space. You know, and we've gotten Sunrise out of the 200s, it's now back up into the 300s, which is a nice place for them to be. But I think the point of the EDTF is that it just needs to be kept on the radar screen as something to always be watching for. You know, it's hard to say how the rapid escalation in prices, are those houses just gonna become so out of sight for young families? I mean, we're starting to see kind of an influx of young families, some turnover, but, you know.
The same thing that happened around Arrowhead, where
Yeah.
the owners finally retire, I'm starting to see it.
But when a starter home becomes $800,000 in that part of the district, you know, are you gonna find families with
Well,
kindergarten?
you do on 39th too, it's like 8 hours, 6,
So-
7, 8.
What do you guys need from us?
So, the recommendation
Yeah, I don't, that's
So,
all
Right.
what they're hoping for is
Yeah, what are we voting on?
what we're hoping for is an approval of the recommendation, so the 3 bullet points. So
Scenario nine.
scenario 9.
Yep.
You know, continue to search for property, continue to keep on the radar screen the repurposing of the east side. That will then allow us to, with that board approval, we can then incorporate that into our capital facilities plan for our upcoming update with Snohomish County, which will hopefully make us eligible for impact fees. Then it'll really be the process of the EDTF and recommendation and the capital bond planning task force kind of working in conjunction with one another to assess the full capital facility needs across the district and trying to merge those two into a bond proposal that makes the best sense. And you know, what we know from every 4-year cycle is we're gonna start off with needs that are gonna be the hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, and we're gonna have to prioritize that list down to, in my mind, although I won't be here, something around the $200 million mark for the 2018 bond.
So you don't need us to make a decision on the single dual?
No,
That was
no,
just-
that's
No,
something
it's
that.
just
that's
Information.
discussion.
Yeah, no, that was great information, I'm just
Yeah.
trying to figure out what I gotta do.
Okay.
What,
Yeah.
And in terms of the controversy, I'm sitting here, have seen lots of UTF. I'm not feeling, I mean, like, what is the concerns or issues or questions that really should be in front of us? It seems like this is, as you say, it's just the song that never ends. It's the next process. We have someone built property, this was the next property to build, and squeezing something
And I think
into,
that
so,
it's the communication of that.
I think the concerns are, we've talked about a couple of them, so portions of the district that just are not tuned into the challenges of the north end of the district. I think the other challenges are making sure that you keep your capital program balanced so that different constituent groups in the district feel like they're seeing benefit from their tax dollars continuing to support bond measures in the school district. And then, I think addressing the concern of, well, wait a minute, I thought we just built a new school and that was all we were ever going to need, so it's telling that ongoing story. I think those are really the challenges.
And another boundary change.
And another boundary change.
Maybe small, but it's still gonna be a boundary change.
And it's hard for us, because we're already thinking about the boundary change and the new high school is
Yeah.
done, open, we're thinking ahead 2025, like Ryan
Rearview
says.
mirror already, huh?
Yeah, it's already very the mirror, but of course, the fallout of that is still to come.
Right.
One of them I'm hearing from friends who live in the Inglemore area is, when are we gonna be going down to the south end bond issues? Let's get a new high school going over in Inglemore, things of that nature.
Or at least a performing arts
That's
center.
right,
Something,
yeah.
yeah, let's, when are we gonna cover something down here for us, because we're growing too. Morelands is also a fast-growing school because of the infill. And so,
infill.
infill, that's where they're buying up 4 or 5 mom and pop 1 acre parcels, and they're making a 35 unit development out of it, or
Oh,
a 70
okay.
unit development out of
Yeah,
it.
go up Simon Street, you see a lot of that.
Yeah, there's a lot.
So I think when you have, 3 million square feet and 32 buildings, and a limited amount of funds from your bond, how do you spread that in a way that gets 60% of your votes plus? Right, I think that's the big challenge that I think many districts have, especially as we grow differently in the area.
One of the advantages I think we have as a school district and really smart planning from people well before me is staying on a 4-year bond cycle. We've been able to keep our bond measures
Steady.
fairly steady and fairly modest in comparison to what we're starting to see and, have begun seeing over the last 10 years in other districts where a 200, 300, 400, 500, Issaquah just passed a $550 million bond. That's a lot of money. We've had the benefit of a 4-year cycle, more or less an ongoing capital facilities project. And it's also hard when you go 8, 10 years between bonds with your community, you're restarting that conversation all the time.
what was Lake Washington's that they just passed?
380.
That's about
They had to
half
go
what's a-
2 year,
Yeah.
it's a 2-year bond.
It's a 2-year
Three-quarter
bond.
of a
But they're going back out in 2 years.
Ah,
And they
just-
want to,
they're
I
gonna
believe they
slide
would
it.
like to get onto the 4-year cycle that
Oh,
we're
yeah,
on.
yeah, it's just, especially for.
So they split it,
Yeah.
and they're gonna ask for the same
Well,
380.
They run it 3 times.
Yes,
Yeah.
they have.
That would be something.
And how do people not see that as a?
Well, they learn what they need. I mean, the other side is if they don't vote for it,
Right.
they figure out, hey, there's 48 kids in this one classroom. That's not very.
I'm just curious, how could they need 750?
More
and
growth in
we-
those schools.
Really?
And they're in King County, which is.
Oh, it's cost more to
really,
build, yeah.
It's really challenging.
And they're
That's
big.
true.
So Sandy,
They're growing.
this
That was
is what the
perfect.
action we need from the board.
Okay.
Okay, we'll figure out the
So just
phasing.
that-
So I'm sorry, so this is, you're asking us to,
Approve these 3 items that we have on here. Scenario 9, let us determine how we're going to work that in with our bond committee, as well as the next 2 bullets.
And Ryan, just for clarity, so the 24 plus classroom wing at Skyview Canyon Creek, the size of that could depend on if it's a 2-phase project.
Yeah.
That facility might be built with more classrooms to create flexibility in the interim before the next phase comes on at the multi-site.
And the other related issue to that is the bigger that addition is, the more we really need to evaluate the common spaces at Skyview and